Welcome to a special bonus Penn State week episode of whatever podcast you want to call it. That's fine. Call it Buckeye Weekly, call it Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning, whatever it is. It's Penn State week. There is more stuff to talk about than we have typical shows to talk about it in. So you're getting a little bit of a bonus episode. Normally we do about one episode a day. You're getting an extra one here thrown in on a Wednesday. It's fine. It's all good. Happy to do it. And a lot of interesting stuff to talk about this week. There was a lot of interesting stuff to hear from Penn State head coach James Franklin during his weekly press conference on Tuesday. It was happening basically the same time as Ryan Day's press conference. Franklin is always one of my favorite coaches to talk to at Big Ten Media Days. I will always kind of throw my hat in the ring for going and sitting to listen to him talk about football for an hour or so every year at Big Ten Media Days. He's got a very thoughtful guy, very frank, honest guy. Just enjoy listening to him talk about football. I think you guys will too. So we're going to let you hear a bunch from James Franklin's press conference this week, talking about the Buckeyes, talking about the matchup, what it means for his team, talking about his first-year starting quarterback and Ohio native Drew Allar, and much, much more. Let's start with, this was kind of an interesting one, because Penn State's defense has been one of the best in the nation so far by a lot of statistical metrics, and even in areas where they're not, Franklin says there's actually some ways that that's a positive, and this is maybe more than just a little bit of spin. It's actually something that defensive coordinator Manny Diaz pointed out to him earlier in the week. Here's James Franklin on that.
One of the things that Manny was talking about the other day, which I thought was a great point and something we take a lot of pride in, I think we're one of the top teams in the country of not allowing opportunities into the red zone. You know, people aren't getting to the red zone. It's funny because some of our red zone stats aren't good from early in the season. Well, there hadn't been a whole lot of opportunities to improve on them because we're not letting people down there, which I'm totally fine with that. But I also think that's a team stat. You know, that's a team stat that our defense is getting a ton of 3 and outs, and our offense is either scoring or able to get a couple first downs before we punt people deep and make them drive the whole field. So, you know, as a head coach, I'm always kind of looking at what are the team stats.
Franklin starts his press conference talking about basically the whole opposing team, and he had a lot of thoughts and has a lot of respect for a lot of different guys in Ohio State's team. I did think it was pretty funny. This was his conversation about Ohio State linebacker Tommy Eichenberg.
A guy that I got like a coach crush on is number 35. Tommy Eichenberg is just a really good football player. He's fun to watch. Physically, he can make the plays. He's obviously the quarterback of the defense. Everything kind of goes through him. You pick up a lot of stuff off tape watching him, as well as TV copies. Just a really smart, instinctive, athletic linebacker who we have a ton of respect for.
Franklin was sort of going out of his way to say positive things and nice things about all sorts of Ohio State players and coaches, and that's understandable. That's kind of the normal game week thing. It is not just gamesmanship. It is not just avoiding bulletin board material to say nice things about Marvin Harrison Jr. He is someone that pretty much everyone in college football is saying nice things about pretty much all the time. What does it make that it makes Marvin Harrison such a tremendous player in James Franklin's mind?
Well, I think number one, the thing that jumps out to me is his body control and ball skills. He's got the ability to contort his body into positions and catch the ball effortly. I think that's the first thing. The other thing, he's just so smooth and fluid. Guy that you guys are familiar with that I think was smooth and fluid, similar to him, is Jahan. The difference is this guy's doing it at 6'3", 6'4". It's interesting. You watch him on tape, and he looks like he's got good size, but when you see him in person, he's a big dude. And I think it's his consistency. He just has consistently, made plays. Obviously, he makes the spectacular plays, but he makes the routine plays as well. So he's obviously somebody that we got to be aware of at all times, and we got a ton of respect for him and how they use him.
Franklin has a kind of funny sense of humor that you're going to hear a couple different times throughout this interview. This question was about Drew Allar. Drew Allar going back home. He's an Ohio native, so his first time playing back in Ohio Stadium as a Penn State quarterback. Also facing his first really big road game as a starter. So is Franklin going to have conversations with Allar about what he needs to do and expectations for the week?
Well, I wasn't going to talk to him, but this is my third interview today, and everybody obviously is talking to him like that, so I am going to talk to him. We don't really do things like that, but I am going to have a conversation with him because I can't control the things that are outside of our building. But yeah, I want Drew to do the same thing he's done all year long. I want him to prepare the same way. I want him to practice the same way. I don't think he's a big social media guy, so tune all that stuff out and get better this week through his preparation and his performance, which is really no different than any other week.
While Penn State's starting quarterback was an Ohio native, Ohio State's starting quarterback played his high school ball in Philadelphia. Kyle McCord, coming out of St. Joe's Prep in Philly, obviously someone that James Franklin watched and knew quite a bit about during his high school career. Joel's obviously been following him quite a bit during his college career. What has James Franklin seen out of Kyle McCord?
Yeah, obviously a big arm. He's a good-sized guy. He's been in their system for a while, so he understands their system. He's surrounded with a ton of talent, wide receivers, tight ends. I think I told you guys I love their tight end. He's been extremely productive. And then obviously they got running backs. So, they do a really good job of, I think they're approaching it a little bit like we've approached it with Drew with a first-year starting quarterback. And he's doing what he needs to do for them to be successful offensively and win games. If you look at his touchdown to interception ratio, really good. Really good. So I'm not surprised. Obviously, his high school coach is on our staff. We recruited him. We know a lot about him. We had a ton of respect for him out of high school and continue to, and think he's going to be, a challenge for us on Saturday as well.
Penn State's offense is putting up a ton of points. They've been very efficient. They haven't really been that explosive. You're going to hear a couple different questions about Penn State's explosiveness or lack thereof at times. So how does James Franklin balance figuring out what they're good at through the first half of the season, as they've been 6-0 and they've been very efficient, but what they need to do also to beat Ohio State and Michigan in those upcoming games?
You have to understand and figure out what the identity of your team is and embrace that identity no matter what the outside world is saying. You have to be comfortable in your own skin and own who you are and how you have to play. That doesn't mean that you're not looking to improve in certain areas. But I think the Iowa game is a really good example. We went in at halftime and said, look, let's not change who we are. And those runs in the first half that were going for 3 to 4 yards started to go for 8 to 10 yards. So I think for me, staying true to our identity and what has gotten us here, while still saying, okay, these are some areas where we have to improve, whether that's on offense, whether that's on defense, whether that's on special teams. Again, I think I've said this to you guys before, studying the analytics are important, so you're aware of what those things say. But a lot of times those analytics and those trends are there for a reason, and it means you're good at something. And I think one of the big mistakes that you can make is get to certain games that some people say are this or that, and you try to be something that you haven't been in the previous 6 weeks.
Talked earlier about Drew Allar being an Ohio native and ending up as a 4-star, maybe even 5-star quarterback prospect, according to some rankings. So how did Drew Allar get out of Ohio? How did Ryan Day let him get away? Well, here's the thing. In the class of 2022, Ohio State already had a quarterback committed. His name was Quinn Ewers, and then he reclassified to 2021. So then the Buckeyes needed a 2022 quarterback. And by the time that happened, they went back to Drew Allar, but Drew Allar was already committed to Penn State. So with that, how did James Franklin and Penn State avoid any recruiting drama? Because that was Ohio State went back to Drew Allar. Drew Allar said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm happy where I am. So how did James Franklin avoid recruiting drama there? Because Ohio State is a very attractive place to play quarterback under Ryan Day. This is kind of an interesting look, not just at this situation, but a little bit at their overall recruiting philosophy as well.
So a couple things. I think, first of all, I think it's how we do things. And I guess what I'm saying by that is we never pressure a kid to commit. Never have. I don't believe in that. Actually, when kids call to commit to us, we usually try to talk them out of it, because I would rather you not commit than commit and change your mind down the road. That's why when it happens, it bothers me, because we were as thorough as we could be with the kid, with the parents, with the high school coach, with the trainers, with everybody. Is everybody on the same page? Or let's not do that. Commitment for us and for them is a strong word. So I think we're very upfront and transparent about that on the front end. But I think the other thing is we typically recruit kids and families that come from similar background where that's important to them as well. And for Drew, I think part of it was I think a lot of people forget he was not this like high profile guy in the beginning. Even when we offered him and started recruiting him, like we thought he was really good and had a ton of potential, but he wasn't really viewed that way on a national scale yet. And he kind of earned it like old school, blue collar, Penn State way, where he just kind of kept getting better. And then went from a 3-star to a 4-star, and then from a 4-star to, arguably, depending on which service you follow, the number one recruit in the country. And then some of those people that maybe hadn't offered him before started to offer him. But again, because of, I think, Drew and how he's wired, and mom and dad and how they're wired and how they raised them, and then how thorough we were and how thorough they were, it didn't change. I remember them even calling us, say, hey, we just want you to know this coach called us. And we don't know how to do it, because we don't want to be rude, but we don't really want to talk to them. And I don't want you to hear that we're talking to these people, because we're not. But they were just super transparent. And we did the same thing. I think if I remember correctly, it was during COVID. So it wasn't even like this sexy recruiting process. I think they came up and drove around campus by themselves with no tour or nothing. So I think it's just a combination of how we do things. We don't offer playing time. We don't do a lot of things that I don't think are realistic in the recruiting process. We try to treat people, and I try to treat people the way I would want if my son was being recruited, how that would go. And I think some people are really drawn to that, and some people aren't. So we're not for everybody, We're not going to just tell you everything you want to hear. And to be honest with you, I don't want the same in return. What do you like? What don't you like? Let's talk through this. So for the most part, we don't have a whole lot of drama, and that was the same with Drew and his family.
Mentioned earlier, Penn State has not been particularly explosive. That's particularly true in the passing game. Now, Allar is a first-year starter, and he has been a little bit cautious. That's good, because he hasn't had any interceptions, but they really have not had a lot of big plays through the air either. So where is Drew Allar improving? And I thought this one was another really interesting answer from James Franklin.
You spend your whole career trying to get quarterbacks to take checkdowns. Every quarterback wants to throw the corner route or the go route or the post. Who's throwing checkdowns in their backyard? Right? So that's why I got so uncomfortable and upset last week, because it was just so foreign. So here we got a young kid who's starting for the first time. And we can call those plays and he'll take the check down. And to me, he's doing a really good job of keeping the main thing, which is protecting the football, trying to create explosive plays when they're there, but not forcing them, managing the game. And when you say manage the game, sometimes people look at that as not a compliment. Like, the quarterback on every play, whether it's a run game, whether it's RPO, whether it's traditional pass, there's a lot on that guy's plate to make sure that we're not running dead plays. So he's being graded mentally as well as physically on every single play. And he's done a really good job. He's getting more and more comfortable with that every single week. I think he's refining his process of how he watches film, how he studies the game plan. So I'm very pleased with him, and I want Drew to understand this, and I want our team to understand this. And that's what I addressed with them on Sunday. That's what we have to do this week. If our process is what we say our process is, we just have to take the next step this week and get better again this week. Not do anything more than that. Drew doesn't need to be anything more than what he's been the previous weeks. He just needs to continue to refine his process. So I think he's just been steady. And to me, when you're steady and you're making small gains daily with your mental approach and your emotional approach and your physical approach to the game, you get better, and you'll like where you'll be at the end of the season. And that's what he's doing, and not listening to all the other stuff.
The last time the Penn State Nittany Lions beat Ohio State was back in 2016. You probably remember that game. Whiteout in Happy Valley, blocked field goal. You remember the drill. That Penn State team, 2016, was famous for getting off to slow starts, but finishing strong. Now, this year's team has been somewhat the same. So is that a concern? Is that something you can do something about? This is another one where you get a little sense of James Franklin's sense of humor off the start of this answer.
I think I had the same answer in 2016, but with a different commissioner. Commissioner Petiti came and saw me before the season. He said, "Look, I want drama, so wait till the second half, get everybody watching the game to make it exciting." I think it's a similar answer with a different commissioner I gave in 2016. I think sometimes when you have a young team, you got to be able to make adjustments in between series, but sometimes it takes getting in the locker room and settle them down and saying, this is what's going on. But the reality is, we got to find ways to do it faster, and we got to be able to start out fast in practices and in games and play at a high level. But again, I think at the end of the day, I do think we're playing really good complementary football. And that's a term that's thrown around a lot. But I think we're probably more complementary and more balanced than we've been in the past. And I think the players and the coaches have done a good job of embracing that. One of the things I've talked to the coordinators, they get up on Sunday and, I talk to the team, and then offense, defense, special team coordinators get up and they kind of summarize the game as well. And we do it at that as a team. Some places don't. You go into your separate rooms. But I think it's always important for our defensive players to hear what Mike is telling our offense, because they're learning football. And I think it's good for our offense to hear from Manny, because they're learning football. And obviously, as you can imagine, what the offense is teaching in 2 minutes, usually the defense is teaching the opposite, but maybe a different way of looking at it. So, one of the things that I think has been really good is a lot of times we'll talk about an offensive stat, but it's really not an offensive stat, it's a team stat. And the offense, I think we may be leading the conference in points or something right now. Is that right? Well, that's not an offensive stat. our defense is putting our offense in a position to have short fields. That's a team stat. Just like I talked about on defense and red zone opportunities against our defense. That's a defensive stat, but really the way we're playing, it's truly a team stat. And I think one of the things that's been really good is Manny to get up and address the defense, but talk to the offense about what the offense is doing to put the defense in the best position to be successful. And Mike doing that with the offense and then to the defense. I think that's been really good, and then Stacy as well.
Penn State is 6-0, but they have really not had to play a four-quarter game at any point this year. The Buckeyes obviously had to do that at Notre Dame for sure. So is that a concern for Penn State that they haven't really been pushed for 60 minutes?
Again, I think you control the things that you can control. And I think we've had some situations where maybe we went into halftime and the game was closer than maybe people thought it would be, and maybe there was some sense of that. But you control the things that you can control, and I think we've played the way we needed to play to get better. But yeah, I think obviously you got to be able to win big games in the fourth quarter. You got to be able to win one possession games. We practice those things and practice a lot with 2-minute drills and things like that. But yeah, there's some things that are just going to have to organically happen. But we expect this to be one of those types of games. We've played these guys for a long time, probably up to the last 2 years. We've probably played these guys as well as anybody in the conference. But we got to find a way to be able to win in the fourth quarter and win these one-possession games.
Last year's game in Happy Valley between the Buckeyes and Nittany Lions was definitely a 60-minute battle or very close to it. Penn State actually led about halfway through the fourth quarter before C.J. Stroud and Trevion Henderson led the Buckeyes to a come-from-behind win. So what did the Nittany Lions learn from that experience?
Yeah, I think all of us, right, we're a combination of our previous experiences. And whether you're a first-time coordinator in this league or a first-time player in this league, I think all those experiences, both positive or adversity, I think if you approach them the right way, they help you grow. But we got a ton of respect for Ohio State and their history, and not just now. Like we're literally from a historical perspective is interesting, kind of looking at what Penn State's records were against all these teams before we even got here. Those things are important to study and understand. But I think last year's experience was a learning tool for our entire team, for all of our coordinators and all of our coaches. And I think it probably goes back to the previous question. I think we played really well for 3 quarters and didn't finish. I think that's a combination of a lot of things. But yeah, there are opportunities to grow and get better as long as you approach them that way.
Penn State's passing offense has not generated a ton of big plays, but their rushing offense really hasn't either. They've only had 4 rushes of 20 yards or longer this season. That is actually the same number as Ohio State. So how does James Franklin assess his running backs, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, in terms of making someone miss in the hole or just running those guys over to get more yardage?
Yeah, so good question. A couple things. I think, again, like real football people, like you guys, like our staff, like college coaches that are evaluating us, NFL scouts, I think those guys are running really well and really hard and really physical. To your point, is there times where we're in the open field and we go run the safety over? Yeah. But again, I also think that goes back to the question earlier about, I think it may have been Ben, about, identity. You got to embrace who you are. Like as a player, as a coach, as a leader, as a team, you got to embrace who you are. This is who we are right now, and we're doing it well. I also know when the opportunities present themselves, there is evidence that these guys will make the big plays because there's enough evidence that they will. I still believe what I've said before. I think people are still playing us different. I think they're playing us a little bit different than they did last year based on the safeties and the number of people in the box and how they're fitting the runs, saying that you got two proven commodities. We're going to make these two guys beat us or not allow these two guys to beat us. But again, when we watch the tape on Sundays, we've been very pleased with how they're playing and how they're running. Is there some times where they're one-on-one with the safety and they try to go destroy the safety? Yeah. And would you like them sometimes to make a miss? But I would also say there's examples of them last year doing the same thing, and when they lowered the shoulder, they punished the guy, bounced off it, and went 60. So I just think those things they're going to come. They're going to come, and they're going to happen organically as long as we allow them to come and don't create something that hasn't been detrimental to us to this point.
And finally, got to talk a little bit about Ohio State's three safety look. That was something that Franklin addressed earlier on in a different answer that we didn't play for you, but he was talking about the challenge that three safety look presents for Penn State, and in particular for a team like Penn State that likes to use 12 personnel, meaning one running back and two tight ends.
Yes, I think it's the same reason why people do it, right? When you're playing, say, a traditional 4-3 or a traditional 3-4, you got rules of how you account for the guys in the box and how you're going to block to the Sam, how you're going to combo block to the Mike, how you're going to combo block to the Will, or you're reading the Will and the RPO. Now when they got this extra safety like Ohio State's doing, like Iowa State kind of was the team that kind of, make it kind of sexy and popular out there. It's different than your normal rules of how you account for that guy in the run game, how you account for that guy in the pass game, either as a blitzer or as a robber in coverage. No different than in some ways why it's difficult to defend the wishbone when you don't see it all year long, or the Delaware wing tee when you don't see it all long, or now, in some ways, a traditional two-back power set. So that's where it can become challenging, is you're having to teach things different than you normally do, which with coaches, right, just like teachers, you're trying to, as much as you can, teach like same as or like. Okay, this is like this. This is the same as this. You're putting it into this category. This is how we're going to treat this. And this defense kind of forces you out of that a little bit, and it's got to be more specific to this defense and how they play. So you just don't have the accumulated reps against this type of defense.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. As I mentioned earlier, I do enjoy listening to James Franklin talk ball. He is, he's a very honest, very straightforward kind of coach. Gives you some really interesting answers you don't necessarily get from everyone. And I know he's sort of a little bit of a one-dimensional figure from people who just look at him and say, oh, it's the guy who can't manage the clock or the guy who can't win the big one. Really interesting guy. I really enjoy listening to him talk about football. Got a pretty good team this year. So hope you guys enjoyed that one. We will be back a little later on today with a typical episode, but wanted to give you that extra one as a little bit of bonus, because, boy, there is a lot to talk about this week as the Buckeyes, Nittany Lions, get set to play noon on Saturday, big noon kickoff on Fox. We'll have our usual pregame show from Ohio Stadium, and then, of course, the big live postgame show, win or lose. Oh, boy, that is going to be quite a show. Very eventful afternoon. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Make sure you hit that bell so you get notified when we do those live shows. There's going to be a whole lot to talk about. No matter how that game goes, going to have a very big impact. The Big Ten East race, Big Ten championship race, college football playoff race, national championship race. There's a little bit of stuff on the line this weekend. Make sure you are part of all the fun at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle and BuckeyeHuddle.com. We will talk to you guys a little later on.